John Dryden, who is born in uh, 19th August 1631 and died in 12th May 1700. Okay, was an English poet. We all know about him. Literary critic, translator, and playwright who in 1668 was appointed England's first poet laureate. He is seen dominating the literary life of Restoration England to such a point that the period came to be known in literary circles as the Age of Dryden. Romanticist writer Sir Walter Scott called him Glorious John, so it's also important who called John Glorious John, that is the Walter Scott. Okay. Dryden was the dominant literary figure and influence of his age. He established the heroic couplet as a standard form of English poetry by writing successful satires, religious pieces, fables, epigrams, compliments, prologues, and plays with it. He also introduced the Alexander um, so he also introduced the Alexandri Alexandry and triplet into the form. In his poems, translation, and criticism, he established a poetic diction appropriate to the heroic couplet. Auden referred to him as the master of the middle style that was a model for his contemporaries and for much of the 18th century. The considerable loss felt by the English literary community at his death was evident in the elegies written about him. Dryden's heroic couplet became the dominant poetic form of the 18th century. Alexander Pope was heavily influenced by Dryden and often borrowed it from him. Other writers were equally influenced by Dryden and Pope. Pope famously praised Dryden's versification in his imitation of Horace epistle. So Dryden taught to join and the varying pause, the full resounding line, the long majestic march, and a energy divine. So this is the line. And Samuel Johnson summed up the general attitude with his remark that veneration with which his name is pronounced by every cultivator of English literature is paid to him as he refined the language, improved the sentiments, and tuned the numbers of English poetry. His poems were very widely read and are often quoted, for instance, in Henry Fielding's Tom Jones and Johnson's essay. Johnson also noted, however, that he is therefore with all the variety of excellence, not often pathetic, and had so little sensibility of the power of effusion purely natural, and that he didn't esteem them in others. Simplicity gave him no pleasure. So, readers in the first half of the 18th century did not mind to this too much, but later generation considered Dryden's absence of sensibility a fault. On the first attack of Dryden's reputation was by William Wordsworth, who complained that Dryden's description of natural objects in his translation from Virgil were much inferior to the originals. It's also important. However, several of Wordsworth's contemporaries, such as George Crabbe, Lord Byron, and Walter Scott, were still in admire of Dryden. Besides, Wordsworth did admire many of Dryden's poems, and his famous that is also important, that is intimation of immortality ode was something stylistically of Dryden's Alexander's Feast. John Keats admired the fable and imitated them in his poem Lamia. So later 19th century writers had little use for verse satire, Pope, or Dryden. Matthew Arnold famously dismissed them as classic of our prose. He did have a committed admirer in George Sainsbury and was a prominent figure in quotation books such as Bartlett, but the next major poet to make an interest in Dryden was T.S. Eliot, who wrote that he was the ancestor of nearly all that is based in the poetry of the 18th century, and that we cannot fully enjoy or rightly estimate 100 years of English poetry unless we fully enjoy Dryden. Okay, so however, in the same essay, Eliot accused Dryden of having a commonplace mind. Critical interest in Dryden has increased recently, but as a relatively straightforward writer, like the William Ibsen. Okay, yeah, so his work has not occasioned as much interest as Andrew Marvell's, John Donne's, or Pope's. Dryden is believed to be the first person to posit that English sentence should not end in prepositions because Latin sentence cannot end in preposition. Dryden created the proscription against prepositions standing in 1672 when he objected to Ben Jonson 1611 phrases the body that is the bodies that those souls were frightened from, though he didn't provide the rationale for his preference. And often translated his writing into Latin to check whether his writing was concise and elegant. Latin became being considered an elegant and long-lived language with which to compare. But then Dryden translated his writing back to English according to Latin grammar uses. So there is just a long process that Dryden take in his writing. Okay, as Latin does not have sentence ending in preposition, Dryden may have appealed Latin grammar to English, thus forming the rule of no sentence ending preposition subsequently adopted by the other writers. The phrase "blaze of glory" is believed to have originated of Dryden's 1686 poem "The Hind and the Panther." The Hind and the Panther, referring to the throne of God as a blaze of glory that forbids the sight. Okay, and his poetic style also important. What Dryden achieved in his poetry was neither the emotional excitement of the early 19th century romantics nor the intellectual complexity of the metaphysicals. His subject matter was open, factual, and he aimed to expressing his thoughts in the most precise and concentrated manner. Although he uses formal structures such as heroic couplets, he tried to recreate the natural rhythm of speech, and he knew that different subjects need different kinds of verse. In his preface of Religio Laici, he says that the expression of a poem designed purely for instruction ought to be plain and natural, yet majestic, the florid, elevated, and figurative way in for the fashion. For our begotten in the soul by showing the objects out of their true proportion. A man is to be cheated into passion, but to be reasoned into truth. So the his Dryden's translation style also important. While Dryden had many admirers, he also had his share of critics. Mark Van Doren among them. So Van Doren complained that the translating Virgil's Aeneid Dryden had added a fund of phrases with which he could expand any passage that seemed to him cut. Dryden didn't feel such expansion was a fault, arguing that as Latin is a naturally concise language, it cannot be duly represented by a comparable number of words in English. Okay, so he recognized that Virgil had the advantage of a language wherein mass may be comprehended in a little space. The way to please the West judge it is not to translate a poet literary and Virgil list of any other. For example, take line 786 to 795 of Book 2 when Anisis sees and receives a message from the ghost of his wife, Creusa. Okay, so Dryden's translation is based on presumed authorial intent and smooth English. In line 790, the literal translation of Hake ubi dicta dicta date is when she gave these words, but she said gets the point across, uses half of the words and makes for better English. A few lines later, with con, uh, conastus, okay, Iblis, Silo, Dari, Barichia, si, sorry, Circum. So this is the Latin language. Okay, so if we skip, I skip here. So he selected works. There is the I share the screen. Okay, the wild gallant, something that you can pause and you read the name, and if you want to sum up them, you just google on it and you know much more about this work. So John Dryden was, we know that he is an English poet. Okay, I repeat that another more time. And his most famous poem is Absalom and Achitophel, 1681, and we all know that. And after writing the poem Anash Miravilles, okay, in 1667, Dryden was named Poet Laureate of England. Dryden wrote plays throughout the 1670s and was at the forefront of station comedy. Okay, his more famous, best known plays was Marriage a la Moody and in 1673 and All for Love in 1678. Okay, and he grabbed attention from Charles II in the 1680s. Dryden converted to Catholicism and set to work criticizing the uh, Catholic Church, which ultimately lost him the position of poet laureate. So he converted Catholicism, okay, Catholic Church. At the end of his career, Dryden returned to the theatrical writing and also took up translation. He died in 1700 from God. Okay, works of John Dryden. So his famous writing, we know that the Absalom and Achitophel by John Dryden. So is a heroic satire written by him. Okay. Um. Okay. It's and a house street. It is to love. It is another by John Dryden. So we know that England's first poet laureate 1688 and still remains an influential poet in British literary canon. He was written some of the most valuable work has emerged in Restoration England, and another is Alexander Feast or the Power of Music. Alexander, it is an ode written by as okay, sure, same thing I repeat here. You can see it is written in 1697 in celebrating the Saint Cecilia's Day. It's also about what is his old name and why, in which purpose he wrote it. The original ode was set to music by the musician Jeremy Clarke, but due to its relative of security. And the another, the All for Love. We read the book, and it's based. So Dryden he himself acknowledged that his 1667 plays All for Love is an imitation of William Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, which was written in the early 60s. It is a heroic drama that follows many of the same story beats of Shakespeare. Annie Killigrew, the poem to the precious memory of the accomplished young lady Mrs. Annie Killigrew, published in 1686 in an elegy written by John Dryden in the memory of Annie Killigrew, a British poet who lived between 1660 and 1685. Anasmas mirabilis. Those who subscribe to such beliefs which confidently assert that one of Nostradamus may instinctively abstract quatrain for foretells the coming of the Great London of Fire 1666 as far as citywide conflagration go. The 1660 blaze that made it way. Happy the Man, Happy the Man, most familiar short poems to the modern reader, and yet this poem is not entirely of his own making. The Hind and the Panther, the Hind and the Panther, written in 1687, in the regarding religion during the time. Dryden wrote his poem. He left the Church of England and converted to Catholicism. The poem is the longest poem. Okay, the Hind and the Panther. A Mac Flicon and Marriage a la Mode, most famous play. Okay, first performed in London by the King's Company in 1673. The medal is published in 1681. Okay.